Hello, and welcome to One Spark Stories, the podcast where innovators, creators, and some unsuspecting risk takers share about navigating highs and lows, laughter and tears, and how sometimes all it takes is one spark of inspiration to find your way to happiness. This podcast will leave you inspired to take action on your own purpose as we connect, create, and celebrate unique sparks around the globe, once again proving that it is a small world after all. I am your host, Katie Currens, and I am so ready for you to meet Rob Midiri. Rob and I just returned from an event where we had the opportunity to connect with quite a few other innovators and creators, so it only made sense that we record while the energy is high. Rob is a certified project manager in healthcare and is currently serving as the director of operations for an expanding pharmacy practice. Rob has years of experience running projects of all different sizes and complexity throughout healthcare, leveraging data analytics to implement strategies for diversion and loss, as well as leading teams to increase their margins, have operational efficiencies figured out, and implement those best practices. One thing that is powerful to note is that Rob has reached this level of success without a college degree. Like many other leaders, he has leveraged his skill set of networking with the intent to form authentic relationships while maintaining a high work ethic and a clear desire to learn. This curiosity has consistently proven effective throughout his professional success by opening so many doors of opportunity, and it is the exact reason why we immediately clicked, and I could not wait to have this conversation today.
Hello, Rob. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Katie. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. I am excited that we actually have time to talk because having just spent several days together, you would think we'd have had much more time to sit and have conversations, and yet that time seemed to fly away. So thank you very much for making time today.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate the invite. And you're right, that time we squeezed so much stuff into that amount of time, but I still feel like we could have done it for another 3 weeks and still not have learned everything that we wanted to.
Yes. And so what Rob and I are referring to is we just got back from, basically, I would call it learning at sea. We had our online learning community head out on a cruise, and because nobody wants to sit in those dank and dreary conference rooms anymore. We're over it. So let's think differently. And it was fantastic. And well, I'll be honest, right away, with the reason I had to jump to have you on here is I know you spent some time, surprise yourself too, recording with Jody Mayberry and Dan Cockrell. And I am sorry, but I could not let it just be the boys club. I had to say, no, get over here now. So that was able to, I guess we'll call it, get your feet wet, right?
Yeah, it was a nice little icebreaker, I suppose.
Yeah, well, before I go too far, I want to share, because this is going to be perfect for conversation later, but if you could explain what happened there, because you were going in to just learn and see what was going on, but share some of that story.
Yeah, so a while back I had reached out to Jody and asked him if there was any chance that Dan and him would be recording a podcast episode on the ship. So he mentioned that there was actually a really good possibility that they were going to do so. Then I asked if I could come and watch it. And him and Dan, I suppose, talked about it. But when we were on the ship, Jody grabbed me and said, "Hey, Dan and I are going to record at 4 today if you want to come watch." I said, "Of course I want to." So I set multiple alarms in my phone to make sure that I didn't miss it. And where are we meeting? I was like 15 minutes early because I didn't want to miss anything. I was so excited. So I was sitting back. We ended up in the Windjammer, and I sat a couple seats down from them because I didn't want to interrupt them as they were recording. And as Jody tees up the show and is getting ready to kick it over to Dan, he points at me and then points down at his seat, or the seat next to him, motioning for me to come sit next to him. And then he goes into the, his introduction component and says, what Rob didn't know is that he was going to be a special guest on the show today, and then just passed the microphone off to me, and away we went, which was a really, really cool thing to happen. And I was completely caught off guard. And what he revealed to me is that I had mentioned that I work better under pressure. Mm. And in his mind, he said, I'm going to test this theory. And that's awesome. So he put me in a highly pressured situation. So then as they wrapped up Dan's show, I started asking Jody and Dan a couple questions. And as we got into a couple of the questions, Jody said, hey, I think this would make a great episode of the Jody Mayberry Show. And then went in to record that and handed it over to me and allowed me to pepper them with questions for a good 15 or so minutes.
I love that. And you could have so easily refused and been like, no, I'm sitting over here. Like, that's cool. Or I think of all the times that we've had that moment where panic sets in. But I think it's so important to recognize that you were able to lean into it and say, is this fear or is this anxious excitement? And it's something that it's a huge opportunity. And for clarification, Jody Mayberry has the Jody Mayberry Show, the Park Leaders podcast. He works with Dan Cockrell on Come Rain or Shine, and his podcast on leadership, Lee Cockrell on Creating Disney Magic. So these guys aren't new to the podcast world, and what an honor to be able to sit in, and I can't wait to listen to when those come out. So yeah, way to turn that moment of panic probably into a really cool experience.
That's one of the things that I really have been trying to work on myself is when there's an opportunity, take it. There's so many times where I would have just let that fleeting moment pass, or I would have said, no, I'd rather not, for fear of saying something completely ridiculous or whatever. And especially ever since joining the community that we're a part of, I've really changed and shifted my focus to make sure that I am putting myself into situations where I normally would be uncomfortable to continue to better myself. And for every time I do that, there's a learning moment or some really cool experience that comes out of it. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but at some point it's going to pay dividends. And it's almost like I'm starting to get excited about finding the next uncomfortable situation to interject myself into it to see what happens. And it's a really cool, I don't want to say like an experiment, but it's a really cool thing.
Yes, it really is. And some examples, I have mentioned I've done a half marathon and I had no desire to do a half marathon, but thought, well, it's convenient. I'm at Disney and there's one going on. Sure. But I wanted to prove that I can do it, even though I always said no. Did a virtual improv night, only because speaking was always such a fear. But that moment came during quarantine where I thought, well, might as well give it a go. And you realize the more you do that, it's not as scary as we set up. And when you said that fear of sounding ridiculous, the key to it is continuing to put yourself in situations. And I think what we've noticed through these learning communities, we each are in together and separately, you realize everybody has that same fear. Everybody. And we put these people on pedestals like, oh my gosh, they know so much more than us. But chances are, if they're a true, authentic leader, they'll own it and say, no, I don't. I need your insight. So what was some of the input you were able to share with them or add? What value did you feel like you ultimately brought to them?
So during the context of the show, or Dan's show specifically, we really just talked about our experience on the cruise and a lot of the things that we learned and the discussions and really I think the biggest takeaway that I have from the cruise. And we learned some really cool things. We did some really awesome exercises, but it really boiled down for me personally was the relationships. I wouldn't be sitting here today with you
Yeah.
if we didn't meet on the cruise and strike up a conversation and
Yeah.
you know,
And have some ridiculous, hilarious antics that, you know, allowed us to all be humble and go, wow, we are a weird group of professionals.
but it works and it was
It does.
fun.
Yes.
And
Yes.
among, being able to talk business and sitting at a bar on the cruise ship and immediately go right into like, a personal discussion
Mhm.
and just kind of jump from group to group. Everybody kind of moved around and connected with different people. You don't get that opportunity, or you don't create that opportunity very often. And again, for me, I definitely didn't take advantage of it enough. And I really wish that I would have. One of the funny things is Amanda Brooks had mentioned, and the way that she equated it was uh, getting in line for a roller coaster, and you have that hour of like angst and build up for the 3 minutes of like, yeah, this is awesome on the back end, but you completely psych yourself up.
Mhm.
And some people will dump out the other side of the roller coaster and never ride it after that, they've psyched themselves up so much. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm not the one jumping off the other side of the roller coaster. I'm going
Yes.
to ride it if I waited that long.
Absolutely. And it's the whole idea of thinking to yourself, what's the worst that can happen? What is that biggest fear? For me, it used to be that people would laugh at me or that they'd think I was dumb. Okay, so they laugh at me. What happens next? Well, I probably will turn red because I always do, and I'll feel really uncomfortable. Okay, so what happens next? Well, they'll leave and they might still talk about me. Okay, but what happens next? None of that is long-term bearing on, is it a moment of discomfort? Yes, but I can learn from that and continue to grow. Why stop from having the moment? So love it.
Absolutely.
All right,
Absolutely.
I'm going to back up because we could keep going, but I think it's important to get these little sparks of insight to you, because it's clear that when the moment of inspiration hits, when that spark of inspiration happens, like joining in a podcast at that sudden moment, you lean into it. So I'm going to see what that spark of thought is with these questions. So first up, let's go with your favorite childhood toy. What was that for you?
I had a couple, but I always had like He-Man action figures. I loved He-Man as a kid.
Awesome.
We would take wiffle ball bats and pretend that they were swords and beat the crap out of each other. But
That's fantastic. Well, maybe not, but I love it.
but it was us.
That's excellent. Do you still have any? Do you still have any of the ones from a
I
kid?
do. I have most of the toys. My mom actually had them in her basement,
Mm-hmm.
and they're slowly making their way over to my house for my kids.
Good for you. I think it's important to hold on to those because sometimes we just need that little reminder. I keep quite a few little toys and trinkets from my past in my office because it reminds me that fun and creative brain, like how often nowadays, granted, you might get in trouble if you start beating each other, but how often now do we get to use that type of imagination and play when we're at work? And yeah, there's so much value in that. So
For sure.
without beating each other while you're playing He-Man, what other ways did you have an outlet or a release as a kid? What were your favorite activities?
So we spent all of our time outside. I mean, video games weren't a big thing then. I mean, Nintendo
Mhm.
was around, but we would go out and ride bikes. We had our development was only half completed. So behind us on the other side of we lived on Horseshoe Lane. The other side of that horseshoe was never done. So we called it the dirt piles because they had dug perk holes and they started excavating in the cul-de-sac. So there was a cliff there. We had endless amounts of trails and hills. So we would ride bikes and dirt bikes and three-wheelers when three-wheelers were still around. Probably the
Yeah,
most dangerous thing out
I was
there.
gonna say before we knew how dangerous
But that was my childhood, sports and playing outside. We spent so much time where our parents would have to call us back to make sure that we ate something during the day at some point.
Yeah. Do you find yourself still drawn to the outdoors and doing outdoor activities, or
When I
what
have
type of, yeah, when you
when,
have time? Yeah.
yeah, when there's time.
Time.
It's funny, my youngest son loves being outside and loves digging.
Mm,
So we create digging pits for him in the backyard, and he'll go back out with his Tonka trucks. And I remember when I was a kid, my parents were having an addition placed onto the house, and the excavators were there, and we had this big giant hole in the ground with tons of dirt. So we would go out and play, in that for a while. And just watching my youngest, it kind of reminds me of that.
that's excellent. So would you say that if the opportunity to go play in dirt, if you see your son out there and you're like, oh, yes, let's do it, would that be a type of squirrel moment for you where you're like, I need to go embrace the dirt, embrace the chaos? Or what other things, what other draws do you have that create those squirrel moments that you're like, oh, I need this podcast, this book, the dirt?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. And I do that,
Right.
and I'm like instantaneous. As soon as somebody says, hey, there's this new book out there that is really, really helpful with this, or Claudine had mentioned to me on the trip that there was this book about imposter syndrome, that would be excellent, and I was like, all right, gotta buy it. Like I have a continual list, but I'm one of those people that I love to see others happy.
Yeah.
So if the kids are outside doing something, I can just sit back and watch and just see like the smiles and the communication between them and all of that. So that is one of the things that I really love doing. I did it several times on the ship. I do it when I have people over at the house. I kind of just take a step back and just absorb, what has been created in that moment. People just
Yeah.
hanging out, having a drink, eating, talking. That's one of the things that I absolutely love.
I am going to follow up on that. What is this book? Do you remember the name of the book? Because I can't be the only one that's listening. Like, oh gosh, that sounds important.
So it's called, I believe it's Perspective, and it's by Amy Cuddy. And her last name is spelled Cuddy.
Awesome. Thank you. I always love a good book recommendation. And see, I scrolled out over it. That clearly is a thing for me. So when you're talking about that moment that you've got these people together and you can see the magic in the room, how has that happened in your career? It sounds like you are the type of person that can see ways that people would just gel, kind of throw that grenade in the middle and say, here's an idea or here's an opportunity, and it just takes over. What ways has that connection really served you well?
So I've made tons of connections throughout my whole entire career, and I really can attribute everything to the networking and the connections. I love building relationships with people. I love learning about them. I'm curious by nature, so I'll ask tons of questions. And I think it's helped me also now that I've stepped into leadership roles from an interview perspective. I
Yeah.
really like to interview people, and I have a hard time staying on script. We'll create this script and somebody will say something intriguing, and I'm like, I have to follow up on that. There's no way that I'm going to let that moment get past me. So I'll send a
Right.
message to my boss saying, going off script, and I'll just see him on, because we have to do everything with Zoom now. He'll just start laughing and go like this because he knows
Yeah.
exactly what I'm going to do.
But there's power in that and going with the moment and understanding that, you know what, the questions we're asking or the conversation direction is not aligned with our bigger purpose. And I think it's really powerful that you're able to say that to your boss and that they recognize the value and don't put a hard stop. Because I'm going to be so bold to assume there's moments that has served the organization really well. If you could share a little more about what it is that you do to give perspective on what those conversations may even be.
Yeah, sure. So I was interviewing a pharmacist a few weeks ago, for our pharmacy down in Texas. And she was talking about her history and where she grew up and the sport that she played. And I said, well, how did you like being captain of the team? At no point did she say that she was captain of the team, but I knew I would have been astonished if she wasn't. And
That's
so
cool.
there was that moment where she would paused and said, well, how did you know that? And I explained to her, based on the way that she has approached most of the questions and the leadership traits that she has exhibited during the interview, led me to believe that. And she was, in fact, the captain of the team. And one of the really, really amazing things that she said was that even though I was the captain, we still needed all of us to win for us to be able to win that tournament. So I spent a lot of time, and I'm paraphrasing, but she spent a lot of time working with each individual on the team to make sure that as a team, they were united, and as a team, they won the tournament or the match or whatever it was. So, and again, just going back to how I love learning about people and building relationships with them and asking questions, it really lends to that, I think. And it was funny, after the interview was over, our HR representative that was on the interview with us said, you know, I've never really been in an interview with somebody like you. And I said, can you explain that? Because I didn't think anything different. And he was like,
Yeah.
your ability to make somebody feel comfortable and ask and is really, really cool. And you get the answers that you're looking for. You're not leading, but you get what you need out of it. And then at the end of it, I am quickly able to say, okay, this is what I thought, and this is, you know, the strengths, and this is the opportunities. And he was like, I've been doing this for decades, and you just are able to pick up that quickly. So I was really flattered by it, one, and it really made me sit back and think about, hey, maybe I do have a special talent or a gift in this area.
I think that is huge. Asking the right questions. Like you said before, there could be a script, and that might be a good guide. I mean, notes are always helpful, making sure you stay aligned with that end goal. But when that opportunity arises based on what you're hearing, you know, are we on target or not? And you have to adapt. So that to me is something not enough people lean into, either professionally or personally, and making those connections. And I would like to clarify, it sounds to me like when you talk about making connections, you're not just saying connect on LinkedIn, connect on LinkedIn, connect on LinkedIn, generic message, generic message, generic message. Wow, I have a lot of followers. Whoop, whoop. That doesn't seem to be the direction you're going. Is that correct, or is that a successful method you found?
Yeah, I've never evaluated or valued my ability to connect on the number of people that I have.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, I like to be able to help people. So usually when I try to make a connection, I'll look for something, you know, something similar, and then kind of lean into that and say, hey, if there's anything that I can ever do to help you. And that's something I've learned, because initially when I started out this whole entire thing, I'm like, I'm going to look for people that can help me.
Mm.
And I learned quickly that, you know, that doesn't really give you an authentic connection or genuine relationship. And that's what the important part is. And the people that are going to go to bat for you are going to be those genuine, authentic relationships and relationships that you've established. So I really changed my whole entire thought process, um, to say, what can I do for you? Because if I can help somebody, then that's a win-win. If I can provide some kind of insight or some kind of expertise into something, I'm really doing my job and doing what I enjoy doing anyway.
Yeah. And it doesn't end there, because you're continuously reaching out and connecting and going to events where you're learning. And so that seems to be where some people miss, is they provide the value. They know they have that value, forgetting that it's a continuous cycle. You're constantly learning and growing to the point where it becomes so innate, you don't even realize you're doing it. You don't even realize, like, oh, geez, I'm signed up for another mastermind next month. but there's power in those connections. And thinking through all the ones you've made over the years, are there any that really stand out as people that have sparked an idea or a change in your career for the good, that whether or not they were in your field? How have connections helped you with that?
It's ironic that I'm now looking at it from this side of things. Back when it initially happened, I didn't realize how it would change the trajectory of my career for long term. So I was working in the hospitals as a pharmacy technician for quite some time, and I worked at a couple different hospitals in Philadelphia, and was networking, but didn't realize that's what I was doing, making friends, having those genuine relationships. And at one point, a friend of mine came to me and said, "Hey, this company that I work for is looking for somebody, and you have the perfect skill set." And I knew the system. I worked with it on the customer side of things. And it's not just about the networking. You have to bring something to the table. You have to have a skill. You have to work hard at it. It's not just going out and making friends or having a drinking buddy and then you get a job. It doesn't work that way. You have to offer something. So she had seen that I had, a skill set that they were looking for. So recruited me to the company, and I went in and I interviewed, and my interview went really well. And I think that's another important piece, is just because you know somebody, you still have to go in and interview.
Right.
You don't just get the job because you're friends with somebody, or it doesn't work like that. I know sometimes from the outside looking in, it could appear that way. So when I got the job, I used that because it was a traveling position. So I covered a relatively large area in Philadelphia, and I traveled up to the Northeast, Massachusetts, Rhode Island areas as well. So each hospital that I went into, I made sure to make connections with people there, and would just work hard, continue to be transparent and genuine, authentic, all of those important characteristics. And as I continued to work, I became friends with somebody who's my current boss, and I've been working for him for about 14 years, actually 15 years now, in 3 different institutions. And he was looking for somebody with my skill set at that point to come in and optimize a lot of the programs and take care of the technology and look at some of the procurement side of things within the pharmacy department. So I happily went in and again interviewed, had a great interview, and was able to achieve that role. And then it just continued to compound, where I would just keep talking with people, and then I would expand outside of the department and go into other departments, because with each of those connections, you really learn something. You learn a different perception or perspective on things, which is super important in any field, not just a medical field or teaching. It's really, really vital to have that perspective, and even more important to that, to be open to it, to be open to somebody else's thoughts and opinions and ideas, and figure out how you can incorporate that into your processes.
Yes, that is also true, because as you progress throughout your career, the older, outdated mindset would be, well, maybe you haven't put in the years. Maybe you don't have this licensure. Maybe you haven't been in this department, where traditionally it was a numbers game. Like, well, once you hit this many years, you might be considered, or, some facet of that. Nepotism was the big no-no. Well, I think that word nepotism has kind of shifted away from the negative connotation with it, to where we're not going to give you the job but lean in on those references, lean in on those connections, because that's where your authenticity shines. Are you truly curious? Are you constantly learning and growing? And that's going to set people up for their career far better than just staying stagnant in a job, waiting until you've served your time. So, how has that? I know that your career path maybe didn't start in what some others did, speaking all the way back to even your training and education. Could you share a little bit about that? Because here you are helping it with interviews for your company, and clearly it's not just a local business, you're working on a large platform. How has that really been created through these connections?
Yeah, so I never finished college. I went initially for computer programming and thought, don't think I really want to do this. And then I switched over to pharmacy school and just didn't fully put myself into classes and all that stuff. And
Happens to all of us.
right? Sometimes fun looked a lot better than class did.
Uh-huh.
But but one of the things that I really learned there, and I think I spent a lot of time networking there. I still talk to a lot of the people that I went to college with. So, looking back on it, I still was doing the networking thing at that point. But I think one of the things that really helped me along the way is that I'm a hard worker and I'm a quick learner. So just because I didn't finish college doesn't mean that I'm not able to learn things quickly. It just wasn't my thing. And I don't think college is for everybody. I think there's a lot of different methods that you can use to get somewhere. And integrity and proving yourself are always two great traits to rely on. Because again, if you lack integrity, you're not going to keep those relationships. People are going to see through
Yes.
that, and they're going to see what you are trying to accomplish is selfish, as opposed to what you're trying to accomplish is giving back or helping to make others' lives better in some fashion. I mean, you think
Yes.
about everybody as your customer, and you want to use that. And I just have different customers. That's all. It's just a
Yes.
little bit different.
That's fantastic. And you really can create the opportunity that you want for yourself through those connections by being curious and working. And I have to call out one of the I don't mean to keep harping on the crews or masterminds or events that we're in, but Deshaun is somebody that I have to mention because he came over from Netherlands, and he is 21 years old, flew by himself. His parents were obviously very concerned with the travel that was involved and going to meet a bunch of strangers beyond the screen. But Deshaun has always known he's wanted to work in operations at a theme park. And so when the opportunity came to be closer in connection with this community we have, who has a lot of involvement with large global theme parks and companies, then he took it. And we were just talking, Rob, about how the power that he now holds as a 21-year-old, still going through college, the conversations he's having with leaders and organizations this week are setting him up for a career he probably can't even conceptualize this quite yet. I don't know. I'm still baffled by it. Do you think at 21 that you would have had the clarity that he has, and what meant, like, how can we get others to really embrace the power that holds? What did you see come from that?
I would have never had the foresight at 21 to do what he did and to
Yeah.
even join a community like this. It really is, one, it's unbelievably refreshing. But I was telling my wife, Katie, when I said, I can't wait to just sit back and watch Deshaun's career trajectory take off. I was like, I want to get his autograph now so that when he
Right.
is running this global organization,
Yeah.
that I'm like, look, I know him.
Right. Yes, I
But
know.
he's completely, I mean, he's so resourceful and is so, he knows exactly what he wants to do, and he knows the path that he needs to take to get there. And even like sacrificing some other, like fun times at a party versus joining one of our meetings.
Yes.
It's really remarkable to watch somebody that has that type of drive and that knowledge of where they want to go going forward,
Yeah.
and to set himself up with the resources, because this is all resource based.
Yes.
And again, the communications and the connections, like that's just a really, really strong resource that can help open the door. It's not going to pave the way for you, but it can help open the door. And people that see your integrity and your drive and your motivation are much more willing to open the door for somebody of that talent level and skill set than others. So it's going to be really, really exciting to watch where he ends up, and everybody for that matter that was on the cruise.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see where everybody is in a year and 2 years and 5 years, and just what they're doing, what their businesses are shaping out to be at that point. It's going to be so exciting.
And there's so much power in that thought, which is why I'm encouraging everyone get involved in these type of learning communities, because now we have this tight-knit group that is constantly cheering for us. They want to see us succeed in the next 6 months, 1 year. We have people ready to refer, ready to make a phone call, because we've seen that integrity. We've seen it. And so I cannot encourage everyone enough to find a group, find an alliance that is aligned with your bigger goal, aligned with that vision, and run with it. See where it takes you. It might not be anywhere for a while. I've been in some communities for a long time because we do just like to collaborate and have conversations. But when it all of a sudden, when that switch flips, when the spark occurs, it's incredibly powerful. So I, like you, cannot wait to celebrate all the successes. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we celebrate something about you that we have not addressed yet. So I've got some ideas that we, can celebrate coming out of this cruise with a lot of really cool connections and memories and amazing learning experiences. But what is something that you think we need to acknowledge and celebrate for you?
So I agree with the cruise, and the fact that I was able to spend that time with my wife on there, and that we could learn together. And a lot of the leadership skills that we learned and talked about can really apply in any area of your life. It doesn't have to be just at work. You can use it as a spouse and be a better spouse. You can use it as a parent to be a better parent or a better friend. So I thought that being able to do that in the group, and then watch us, how we interacted differently on the ship, and as we learned, new skills and looked at the skill set differently, it really, really helped. And then for us to be able to kind of like go off and talk to all different people and learn even more about ourselves and about each other and about the group as a whole. I thought that was a really, really cool thing to just watch unfold in front of my eyes. And these are things, memories and skills that I will take for a long time, and look for different ways to apply them, and different ways to use it. And hey, if this doesn't work in this situation, I know that I learned something from it. It's not a failure. I learned something, and then I can apply it elsewhere.
Absolutely. And I commend Katie for just jumping in there and joining our chaos. And it really was so cool to have spouses and friends, everybody coming into these workshops. It was not just for leaders. If you wanted to come in. And then we had Guinevere, right? Yes. She also recorded. She's 11 years old, makes her own mocktails, and she had a live mocktail interview experience with Dan Cockrell and took on all of our chaos. She embraced the opportunity. And when you lean into it, others get excited and they want to have you succeed. So I celebrate that with you, that you not only were able to take these leadership lessons and apply to your professional growth, but to look at that internal piece and go, wow, we can apply these at home. It's
right.
very, very related. So awesome, Rob. Well, thank you. Let me see. I did have one very important question. You are from the neighboring state, you're over in Pennsylvania, and I know that there's part of you that really can support my team. And what is your confidence in the Bengals return to the Super Bowl?
The who?
Oh my gosh. I knew that blank stare was for a reason. No, I fully expected that. So that's fair. I thought I'd go for it. It was worth a shot, right?
I think you said, I heard Eagles, right?
Wow. Birds are beautiful. They're very, very calming. So thank you for putting that in my mind.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we've been way too serious. So I'm going to go ahead and close out with a little something. Come on, get your gear. There we go. Oh, I've got my nice Dopey hat. You're rocking your shades. We are ready to party.
I am dopey.
I like it. I wasn't going to say it. No. Well, thank you, Rob. I promise you that we will be circling back to check in on your success here. Maybe we mark it a year that we'll have to check back in, if not before.
That sounds awesome. I look forward to it.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. And we will make sure that people connect with you. LinkedIn, probably the best way to find you.
Yep. LinkedIn would be the way.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Until next time.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, so you may not believe this, but that might be the most serious conversation that Rob and I have had yet. I am always fascinated with the stories behind the person that we get to know. And while Rob and I shared so many laughs during the event that we've referenced, it is amazing just hearing the way that he has built his career ultimately by asking the right questions, by leading with that curiosity, and understanding that it's not just about connecting, it's about actually genuinely caring. It's about making sure that you have something to offer them, not asking what they can offer to you. So remember to keep collecting new ideas, keep connecting with new people, stay curious, be well, and we will see you real soon.
Fun fact, Romans used to use urine in their toothbrushes. Isn't that a crazy fact? See you later, dudes.
Later, Tater.